Alfred and the Cakes. Many years ago there lived in England a wise and good king whose name was Alfred. No other man ever did so much for his country as he, and people now all over the world speak of him as Alfred the Great. In those days a king did not have an easy life. There was war almost all the time, and no one else could lead his army into battle so well as he. And so between ruling and fighting, he had a busy time of it indeed. A fierce, rude people called the Danes had come over the sea and were fighting the English. There were so many of them, and they were so bold and strong that for a long time they gained every battle. If they kept on, they would soon be masters of the whole country. At last, after a great battle, the English army was broken up and scattered. Every man had to save himself in the best way that he could, and King Alfred fled alone, in great haste through the woods and swamps. Late in the day, the king came to a hut of a woodcutter. He was very tired and hungry, and he begged the woodcutter's wife to give him something to eat and a place to sleep in her hut. The woman was baking some cakes upon the hearth, and she looked with pity upon the poor, ragged fellow who seemed so hungry. She had no thought that he was the king. "Yes," she said, "I will give you some supper if you will watch these cakes. I want to go out and milk the cow, and you must see that they do not burn while I am gone." King Alfred was very willing to watch the cakes, but he had far greater things to think about. How was he going to get his army together again, and how was he going to drive the fierce Danes out of the land? He forgot his hunger. He forgot the cakes. He forgot that he was in the woodcutter's hut. His mind was busy making plans for tomorrow. In a little while, the woman came back. The cakes were smoking on the hearth. They were burnt to a crisp. Ah, how angry she was! "You lazy fellow," she cried, "see what you have done. You want to eat something, but you do not want to work." I've been told that she even struck the king with a stick, but I can hardly believe that she was so ill-natured. The king must have laughed to himself at the thought of being scolded in this way, and he was so hungry that he did not mind the woman's angry words half so much as the loss of the cakes. I do not know whether he had anything to eat that night, or whether he had to go to bed without his supper, but it was not many days until he had gathered his men together again and had beaten the Danes in a great battle. King Alfred and the Beggar. One day the Danes drove King Alfred from his kingdom, and he had to lie hidden for a long time on a little island in a river. One day all who were on the island, except the king and queen and one servant, went out to fish. It was a lonely place, and no one could get to it except by a boat. About noon, a ragged beggar came to the king's door and asked for food. The king called the servant and asked, "How much food have we in the house?" "My lord," said the servant, "we have only one loaf and a little wine." Then the king gave thanks to God and said, "Give half of the loaf and half of the wine to this poor man." The servant did as he was bidden. The beggar thanked the king for his kindness and went on his way. In the afternoon, the men who had gone out to fish came back. They had 3 boats full of fish, and they said, "We have caught more fish today than in all the other days we've been on this island." The king was glad, and he and his people were more hopeful than they had ever been before. When night came, the king lay awake for a long time and thought about the things that had happened that day. At last he fancied he saw a great light, like the sun. In the midst of the light there stood an old man with black hair, holding an open book in his hand. It may all have been a dream, yet to the king it seemed very real indeed. He looked and wondered, but was not afraid. "Who are you?" he asked of the old man. "Alfred, my son, be brave," said the man, "for I am the one to whom you gave this day the half of all the food that you had. Be strong and joyful of heart, and listen to what I say. Rise up early in the morning and blow your horn 3 times, so loudly that the Danes may hear it. By 9 o'clock, 500 men will be around you, ready to be led into battle. Go forth bravely, and within 7 days your enemies shall be beaten, and you shall go back to your kingdom and reign in peace." Then the light went out, and the man was seen no more. In the morning the king arose early and crossed over to the mainland. Then he blew his horn 3 times, very loudly, and when his friends heard it, they were glad. But the Danes were filled with fear. At 9 o'clock, 500 of his bravest soldiers stood around him, ready for battle. He spoke and told them what he had seen and heard in his dream. And when he had finished, they all cheered loudly and said that they would follow him and fight for him so long as they had strength. So they went out bravely to battle, and they beat the Danes and drove them back into their own place. And King Alfred ruled wisely and well over all his people for the rest of his days. King Canute on the Seashore. 100 years or more after the time of Alfred the Great, there was a king of England named Canute. King Canute was a Dane, but the Danes were not so fierce and cruel as they had been when they were at war with King Alfred. The great men and officers who were around King Canute were always praising him. "You're the greatest man that ever lived," one would say. And then another would say, "O king, there can never be another man so mighty as you." And another would say, "Great Canute, there is nothing in the world that dares to disobey you." The king was a man of sense, and he grew very tired of hearing such foolish speeches. One day he was by the seashore, and his officers were with him. They were praising him, as they were in a habit of doing. He thought that now he would teach them a lesson, and so he bade them set his chair on the beach, close by the edge of the water. "Am I the greatest man in the world?" he asked. "O king," they cried, "there is no one so mighty as you." "Do all things obey me?" he asked. "There is nothing that dares to disobey you, O king," they said. "The world bows before you and gives you honor." "Will the sea obey me?" he asked, and he looked down at the little waves which were lapping the sand at his feet. The foolish officers were puzzled, but they did not dare to say no. "Command it, O king, and it will obey," said one. "See," cried Canute, "I command you to come no further. Waves, stop your rolling, and do not dare touch my feet." But the tide came in, just as it always did. The water rose higher and higher. It came up around the king's chair and wet not only his feet, but also his robe. His officers stood about him, alarmed and wondering whether he was not mad. Then Canute took off his crown and threw it down upon the sand. "I shall never wear it again," he said, "and do you, my men, learn a lesson from what you have seen. There is only one king who is all-powerful, and it is he who rules the sea and holds the ocean in the hollow of his hand. It is he whom you ought to praise and serve above all others. The sons of William the Conqueror. There was once a great king of England who was called William the Conqueror, and he had 3 sons. One day King William seemed to be thinking of something that made him very sad, and the wise men who were about him asked what was the matter. "I am thinking," he said, "of what my sons may do after I am dead, for unless they are wise and strong, they cannot keep the kingdom which I have won for them. Indeed, I am at a loss to know which one of the 3 ought to be the king when I am gone." "O king," said the wise man, "if only we knew what things your sons admire the most, we might then be able to tell what kind of men they will be. Perhaps by asking each one of them a few questions, we can find out which one will be the best fitted to rule in your place." "The plan is well worth trying, at least," said the king. "Have the boys come before you, and then ask them what you please." The wise men talked with one another for a little while, and then agreed that the young princes should be brought in one at a time, and that the same questions should be put to each. The first who came into the room was Robert. He was a tall, wilful lad, and was nicknamed Short Stocking. "Fair sir," said one of the men, "answer me this question. If instead of being a boy it had pleased God that you should be a bird, what kind of bird would you rather be?" "A hawk," answered Robert. "I would rather be a hawk, for no other bird reminds one so much of a bold and gallant knight." The next who came was young William, his father's namesake and pet. He was jolly and round, and because he had red hair, he was nicknamed Rufus, or the Red. "Fair sir," said the wise man, "answer me this question. If instead of being a boy it had pleased God that you should be a bird, what kind of bird would you rather be?" "An eagle," answered William. "I would rather be an eagle, because it is strong and brave. It is feared by all other birds, and is therefore king of them all." Lastly came the youngest brother, Henry, with quiet steps and a sober, thoughtful look. He had been taught to read and write, and for that reason he was nicknamed Beauclerk, or the handsome scholar. "Fair sir," said the wise man, "answer me this question. If instead of being a boy it had pleased God that you should be a bird, what kind of bird would you rather be?" "A starling," said Henry. "I would rather be a starling, because it is good-mannered and kind, and a joy to everyone who sees it, and it never tries to rob or abuse its neighbor." Then the wise men talked with one another for a little while, and when they had agreed among themselves, they spoke to the king. "We find," said they, "that your eldest son Robert will be bold and gallant. He will do some great deeds and will make a name for himself, but in the end he will be overcome by his foes and will die in prison. The second son, William, will be as brave and strong as the eagle, but he will be feared and hated for his cruel deeds. He will live a wicked life and will die a shameful death. The youngest son, Henry, will be wise and prudent and peaceful. He will go to war only when he is forced to do so by his enemies. He will be loved at home and respected abroad, and he will die in peace after having gained great possessions." Years passed, and the 3 boys had grown up to be men. King William lay upon his deathbed, and again he thought of what would become of his sons when he was gone. Then he remembered about what the wise men had told him, and so he declared that Robert should have the lands which he held in France, that William should be the King of England, and that Henry should have no land at all, but only a chest of gold. So it happened in the end very much as the wise men had foretold. Robert the Short-stocking was bold and reckless, like the hawk which he so much admired. He lost all the lands that his father had left him, and was at last shut up in prison, where he was kept until he died. William Rufus was so overbearing and cruel that he was feared and hated by all his people. He led a wicked life and was killed by one of his own men while hunting in the forest. And Henry, the handsome scholar, had not only the chest of gold for his own, but he became by and by the King of England and the ruler of all the lands that his father had held in France. The White Ship. King Henry, the handsome scholar, had one son named William, whom he loved dearly. The young man was noble and brave, and everybody hoped that he would someday be the King of England. One summer, Prince William went with his father across the sea to look after their lands in France. They were welcomed with joy by all their people there, and the young prince was so gallant and kind that he won the love of all who saw him. But at last the time came for them to go back to England. The king with his wise men and brave knights set sail early in the day, but Prince William and his younger friends waited a little while. They had had so joyous a time in France that they were in no great haste to tear themselves away. Then they went on board of a ship, which was waiting to carry them home. It was a beautiful ship with white sails and white masts, and it had been fitted up on purpose for this voyage. The sea was smooth, the winds were fair, and no one thought of danger. On the ship, everything had been arranged to make the trip a pleasant one. There was music and dancing, and everybody was merry and glad. The sun had gone down before the white-winged vessel was fairly out of the bay. But what of that? The moon was at its full, and it would give light enough, and before the dawn of the morrow, the narrow sea would be crossed. And so the prince and the young people who were with him gave themselves up to merriment and feasting and joy. The earlier hours of the night passed by, and then there was a cry of alarm on the deck. A moment afterward there was a great crash. The ship had struck upon a rock. The water rushed in. She was sinking. Ah, where were those who had lately been so heart-free and glad? Every heart was full of fear, and no one knew what to do. A small boat was quickly launched, and the prince, with a few of his bravest friends, leaped into it. They pushed off just as the ship was beginning to settle beneath the waves. Would they be saved? They had rowed nearly 10 yards from the ship when there was a cry from among those that were left behind. "Row back!" cried the prince. "It is my little sister. She must be saved." The men did not dare to disobey. The boat was again brought alongside of the sinking vessel. The prince stood up and held out his arms for his sister. At that moment the ship gave a great lurch forward into the waves. One shriek of terror was heard, and then all was still save the sound of the moaning waters. Ship and boat, prince and princess, and all the gay company that had set sail from France went down to the bottom together. One man clung to a floating plank and was saved the next day. He was the only person left alive to tell the sad story. When King Henry heard of the death of his son, his grief was more than he could bear. His heart was broken. He had no joy in life, and men say that no one ever saw him smile again. Here's a poem about him that your teacher may read to you, and perhaps after a while you may learn it by heart. He never smiled again. The bark that held the prince went down, the sweeping waves rolled on, and what was England's glorious crown to him that wept a son? He lived, for life may long be born, ere sorrow breaks its chain. Why comes not death to those who mourn? He never smiled again. There stood proud forms before his throne, the stately and the brave, but who could fill the place of one, that one beneath the wave? Before him passed the young and fair, in pleasure's reckless train, but seas dashed o'er his son's bright hair. He never smiled again. He sat where festal bowls went round, he heard the minstrels sing, he saw the tourney's victor crowned amid the nightly ring. A murmur of the restless deep was blent with every strain, a voice of winds that would not sleep. He never smiled again. Hearts in that time closed o'er the trace of vows once fondly poured, and strangers took the kinsman's place at many a joyous board. Graves which true love had bathed with tears were left to heaven's bright rain. Fresh hopes were born for other years. He never smiled again.